Hey there, welcome back to True North Reviews. My name is Ryan, and today we are discussing the latest Green Day record, Father of All. Something sounds kind of incomplete, but we'll just leave it at that. Green Day are one of my favorite bands of all time. I'll get that out there first and foremost. I wouldn't nearly be as interested in music if it weren't for Green Day. The first album I ever listened to in full while growing up was American Idiot, and because of its rock opera themes or just out of pure nostalgia, it remains one of my favorite albums of all time as well. That's not to hate on Dookie, Nimrod, or 21st Century Breakdown. I've pretty much loved anything this group has had their hands on over the years, and that's even including some songs from the Uno Dos Tres trilogy, which came out after the Billy Joe breakdown at the iHeart Radio Festival many moons ago. The trilogy era of the band around 2012, as many know, marked a stylistic shift into some of Green Day's poppiest and most straightforward songwriting to date, which also many fans would argue is their worst material to date. We'll get into that a bit more as we talk about this new album, if it compares or not. But in 2016, Green Day had a little bit of a resurgence, mixing and melding their rock opera tendencies with pop punk roots on their album Revolution Radio. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I was fortunate enough to see them perform live for that tour. For me, I thought my expectations would never be met with a Green Day concert because they were just on a pedestal for all my life, and somehow they broke my expectations and played one hell of a show. Now, here we are in 2020, in a new decade, with a new album for Green Day, their 13th in total, and my god, after thinking I knew this band for my entire life, Father of All was a difficult album for me to sit through. And that's coming from a longtime Green Day fan here, just being completely honest. So where do I begin? Let's start with the rollout of this record first. So Green Day, they essentially wanted to put out something that they didn't really care about, which can work for punk music. I mean, it's the punk attitude to want to rebel against authority, to stick it to the man. But when your songs are oh so short and there's a pop punk, more accurately pop foundation at the root of them, you're cornering yourself from the get-go. Also, let's not forget that Green Day signed as a partner with the National Hockey League a few months ago. They recently performed at the All-Star Game, but before that, they put out the song Fire Ready Aim, which acts as the theme song for broadcasts on NBC. That song, Fire Ready Aim, is a really short, simple, conventional, rock radio-friendly, commercial-friendly song, and weirdly enough, it doesn't sound like Green Day. It's like they're a shell of their former self as they try to connect with hockey fan bases. What also doesn't sound like Green Day and only heightens my distaste for a good portion of this record is the lead single on Father of All, which is also the title track, and this one came out at the same time of the announcement of the Hella Mega Tour with Weezer and Fall Out Boy. The title track, again, here, being completely honest, when I first listened to it, I couldn't tell if this was Green Day. The falsettos from Billy Joe, the squeaky clean mixing, the lyrics not being tied to anything political, or at least blatantly political. Sure, the song, yeah, it's grown on me and I can get used to the unfocused lyrics, but this thing is a far cry from their greatest work. I guess the redeeming factors for the title track would come from the performance side of things. Trey Cool's fast and fervent drumming and the wiry guitar playing from Billy Joe. Those things are admirable. Going back to the falsettos though, some things are just out of the norm for Green Day on this album. Some things go over better than others. I do want to highlight some strengths first, for at least the ones that you can find few and far between, and they might be scant. The third single on Father of All is entitled Oh Yeah, and I think this was the first moment on the record where things were starting to click with me and I could go along with what Green Day was setting out to do. Different ideas from the group were being thrown out there. Their first ever sample of a song is on here. It's featuring Joan Jett's Do You Want to Touch Me? I actually like this song, Oh Yeah, enough that even before and after knowing it was a sample, I enjoy it. and I think it's different enough in a good way that the influences aren't being worn on the sleeve. But for sure, it still is recognizable when you listen to the two songs in parallel. Another different kind of moment for Green Day on this record that I also like comes on the track Junkies on a High. This one mainly switches up the sound and style of the record itself. It kind of breaks the monotony or the samey sound that this album is plagued by for a good portion of its short runtime. For me, with Junkies on a High, I love the slower crawling on the floor pace of the track. The bass line essentially steals the spotlight while building and falling in accordance with the vocal melodies. I also like the hi-hat driven drum beat. It stands out and is distinguishable amongst the record's tempos and melodies as well. And it's finally a track that doesn't sound too sanitary or suffocated in its atmosphere like other tracks on here, which leads me to one of my big issues while questioning this album's quality: the production. When you listen to this album, it kind of makes sense why it's so bombastic, so overproduced, and clinging onto commercialized gloss. It's Butch Walker. Okay, so this is the dude who worked with Fall Out Boy on Mania. He's also worked with Panic at the Disco. He's made his rounds with alternative rock acts that are trying to make their music serviceable to music fans in the 2010s and now into the 2020s. Applying that to Green Day, the once punk or pop punk band, they suddenly have no soul on this record, or at least the soul has been sucked out of them with the production on Father of All. And yes, I say that realizing original Green Day fans would have said that they sold out many albums ago, or even when they left the punk scene. I rest my case there because I do find myself loving a lot of Green Day's material, and it is relative for how much of the punk aesthetic you want to appreciate. Apples, oranges, whatever. My main point here is that Green Day, on this record, they have substituted any kind of rock that previously defined them with something that is hindered by its poor production. Whether it's the cheesy hand claps and overblown drums on the Beach Boys inspired tune Meet Me on the Roof, or the Weezer inspired I Was a Teenager, there's an excuse for the musical exploration and the curiosity to try something new, or at least rehash something that used to be popular in mainstream music. But when you repackage it and water it down with the kind of production on this album, it really does suffer. I mean, it's one problem to sound like a ripoff of Jet on the song Take the Money and Crawl, but it's a catastrophe if you can't even get the dynamics of the chorus and the verses adjusted properly. And yeah, if we're on the subject of influences, it's important to note that there are conflicting and unalike inspirations that Green Day have had and showcased on this album. Two extreme songs on here, one I like, one I don't. Kind of the theme of this album, I guess, even though you might pick up on the negatives a bit more. Let's start with the positives anyway, because this record does have positives, even though the amount of negative criticisms I'm giving. Graffitia is a track that sounds like a Black Keys kind of closing moment with its Beach Boys-esque bridge decked out with light-hearted keys and a gleeful tambourine. It has one of the more solid tunes on the album that will stick in my head while also subtly working in politically conscious content about prejudice. Now, this is the bold and ambitious Green Day I want to hear, at least having a solid tune behind them, not just imitating Surfing USA, because that's what I hear on the track Stab You in the Heart. They might also just be imitating themselves on that one because it's just like the less raunchy version of their song F Time. Getting down to the crux of this album, though, what I've always come to know and love from Green Day, it's essentially thrown out the window on Father of All, for better or for worse. Some songs nail it while others fail miserably. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to judge Green Day for what inspired this record. I mean, who needs the Ramones, Black Flag, or The Clash, where they began, where their origins reside, when they're now being inspired by earlier decades in the 60s with the Beach Boys, and even more contemporary and newer sounds of the 2000s with Weezer and Jet. All that essentially sounds I do want to hear Beach Boys versus sounds I don't want to hear that mixed with, Weezer and Jet in that era of 2000s. For the most part, this record, it has me torn. I mean, there's a lot I dislike and I am thoroughly disappointed by, but Green Day, they're doing something to keep creating. There are songs on here I do like. I will return to them occasionally, I think. Sadly, this album will not amount to anything of their greatest work. If anything, there's one thing that is true on this album. It's Carefree. If you're Carefree, you might like it some more. If you're okay with the group altering their iconic American Idiot cover, I think you'll be okay. But I'm having a tough time recommending this to diehard Green Day fans. It truly put me through a lot. It made me question what they're going to do next. It's almost like Green Day intentionally meant to go on tour with Weezer and intentionally meant to write songs inspired by Weezer. Maybe they're just trying to turn their fan base into what Weezer has right now with the Ride or Dies. For me, it seems a little late for Green Day to be doing that in their career, but for what's on this record, it has a decent enough start. It has a strong enough conclusion, I guess. I can't even say that wholeheartedly. And then the middle portion isn't cutting it. I'm feeling a strong 4 to a decent 5 on a good day. I guess I can tolerate and be impartial to this. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. There's my review of the new Green Day record, Father of All. I'd love for you to sound off down below in the comments. Tell me what you think of this music, if you got any more enjoyment out of it than I did. I know some people have been enjoying it quite a bit, and I know for sure that there are a lot of people ripping this album to shreds. Leave a like, subscribe if you're new in town. Thanks for watching, and as always, have a rockin' day.